But yeah, so without further ado, I'll introduce our guest for this evening. Alix Krahn is a feminist sports scholar whose research examines sport at the intersection of work and gender, also known as the sport work gender nexus. Her scholarship is an extension of her own personal experience navigating the contested terrain of high performance sport coaching, where women remain underrepresented. Her work is dedicated to addressing overwork culture in sport coaching and the issues of access and opportunity, particularly for underrepresented and or marginalized groups in sport. Her current scholarship examines the precarious labor of sport coaching and additional forms of labor that women with multiple and intersecting identities are required to take on in their respective sport coaching work environments. Preach. Currently, she's the lead assistant coach for the University of Toronto women's volleyball program, which is really exciting. Previously, she led Team Manitoba's women's volleyball team to a gold medal at the 2022 Canada Summer Games, which I witnessed, and it was awesome. Alix is amazing. We're super happy to have her here with us. So over to you, my friend.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I am so happy to be here. And thank you, Allison, for that wonderful introduction. I hope that people can hear my voice. Can you hear my voice? Am I loud enough? I will get my coaching voice on if I need to. Second question is, can you see my slides? Just give
Yes,
me
they
a
look
thumbs up.
great.
People nodding. Okay, awesome. So just so everybody knows, Allison will provide these slides to you after today, so you don't need to frantically take notes or anything. I do have some questions in here that I think weren't reflecting past today, so those will be made available to you. I want to begin tonight by expressing my gratitude really to the Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic for the invitation to speak here tonight, to Allison for organizing tonight, and to all of you for making this part of your evening. I also want to shout out to Beth Bars, who some of you may know as my collaborator in tonight's content. So, yeah, as you already know, I'm Alix and I use she, her, L pronouns, and I'm super excited to be sharing the virtual space with everybody this evening. Before we begin, I just wanted to give you a quick overview for what we're going to talk about tonight and offer a couple disclaimers. So, first, I will invite you to kind of manage your camera this evening. I absolutely love to see faces, and I acknowledge that everybody is probably in a different place and space, and so being on screen might not be possible, and that's totally okay. Second, that this presentation has been designed to be hands-on, so you will be required to participate tonight. Again, your camera doesn't need to be on. I know that it's the end of the day over there for you, and some of us are tired. I also know as an educator and a coach that most of us do not learn by being talked at. And in fact, I think the best way for us to learn is to be engaged and involved with the content. So I have designed tonight with that in mind. And I think finally, I just want to say that, even though I've been invited here to talk tonight, and I'll certainly be leading the conversation, we all really have a responsibility in creating the kind of online learning environment that we want to partake in. And so, in saying that, I'm hoping that you'll join me in creating a space tonight that is respectful, caring, and open. Tonight, I'm tuning in from Hamilton, Ontario, where I live, which is the traditional and unceded territories of the neutral Erie, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I also want to offer a reminder that next week is actually Truth and Reconciliation Week. And so I would really encourage people who have space and time to visit the link here, which will take you to the online portal of the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission website. And this link specifically is for all of the free education that's going to be taking place next week. Most of it is during lunchtime because they acknowledge that people are working. So just wanted to put a plug in for that. All right, so I'd like to start tonight again by acknowledging that, we're at the end of the day, and I'm sure that people are showing up here in all kinds of different ways. Most of us have super busy and full lives, and so I want to help us transition into this space by inviting you all to take just three big deep breaths with me. So breathing all the way in and out. Let's do that 2 more times. In and out. In and out. All right, thank you. So now that we've done that, I also want to invite you to take a moment here just to throw into the chat one word that describes how you're showing up here tonight. Because I'm talking, I'll start by just sharing my word out loud. And so the word and the way in which I'm showing up here tonight is open. Nice. Great. Like to see it, like to see it. These are awesome ways to be showing up. I hear you, Cassandra. I literally just scarfed down my dinner before getting on this call, so my stomach is making funny noises. Awesome. Okay, and those of you who haven't had a chance yet, if you want to, great. If not, that's okay too. It's also it's just this activity is more so for you, for just noting how you're showing up here. So, in framing tonight's conversation, I want to highlight the limited research that discusses the work of sport coaching, which I refer to in my scholarship as overwork culture. On this slide here, you're going to see a few studies on sport coaching work. And really want to highlight again that this is a limited area of study, and there's a few reasons for that. So one is that people in research tends to make the assumption that sport coaching is work without really paying attention to how, in what ways sport coaching is considered work. And I'll touch on why that's really important to get clear on, specifically when we're talking about the work of sport coaches in a moment. The second thing is that there's a lot of confusion actually in the literature and more broadly speaking within public opinion about sport coaching as work. So, more pointedly, most people still view coaching as a pastime or volunteer activity unless a coach is working within the context of professional sport. And here I'll just share an anecdote to highlight this. I see this very often with the head coach that I work with, in that people will ask her what she does for a living. And when she says, I coach university sport, people usually respond with, and what else do you do? And that really kind of leads into, I think, the final thing that's important to highlight here is that when people hear, oh, that your full-time work is sport coaching, sometimes there's a tendency for people to respond with, oh, how awesome. You get paid to have fun. What's that like? Without really recognizing all that goes into running a sport program. So hopefully you can recognize that there are some assumptions being made about sport and sport coaching. My research really examined that question of how and in what ways sport coaching is considered work and or a profession, and the gender division of labor within the context of university sport. Tonight, I'm really only going to be touching very briefly on the research I've done looking at the work of sport coaching. The professionalization of sport coaching is a whole separate discussion. I'm also happy to answer questions about that if people have them at the end of today. So I just want to take a few slides here to share some of the important findings that came out of the study. I acknowledge there might be a fellow academic nerd, somebody who might want to hear more about the X's and O's of how I conducted the research. I, again, would be happy to discuss that with you, but in an effort to get us into the more practical hands-on part, I'm just going to go through this next part quite quickly. So the first finding that came out of my research was that sport coaching is qualified work. So no coach simply just coaches, or very few coaches simply just coach. Most of us are doing other things. And the coaches in this study provided a range of examples Again, given that the context was university, some people talked about teaching, some people talked about service, some people talked about other forms of labor. The second piece is that sport coaching is a boundaryless form of labor. And what I mean by that is that there really are no boundaries when it comes to the time on the coaching job clock and or the type of activity. Again, one of the things that I think is really important to highlight here is that so many of the coaches in my interviews with them talked about using their off season to do more coaching. And one provided an example of how the athletic director at their institution, in fact, expected them to be doing that. So hopefully people can see that's not really time off. That's doing more sport coaching, which in and of itself is more work. So because of this kind of qualified and boundaryless nature of sport coaching, that led me to conclude that sport coaching can result in precarity. When I'm talking about precarity, I'm talking about a very, very specific definition in the literature, which I don't want to bore you with, but I do think it's important to mention that what it's talking about is working experiences that are marked by limited pay, maybe a lack of benefits, unstable working hours, and negative health effects, to name a few. And hopefully, you can see in the responses that were shared here with these three coaches that some of those tenets that I just mentioned to do with precarity. So I think this is a really important piece. And one thing I'm recognizing right now that I didn't add on here is that the performance imperative or the need to win is also another piece that contributes to the precarity of sport coaching. In no other profession is the success margin so narrow. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight. Next, I really took this methodological and theoretical approach that allowed me to consider the private home life of sport coaches. Here is another area that is growing in research, definitely understudied, and requires more attention. And here, what I'm talking about are the specific ramifications of coach work on a coach's personal life. I want to highlight here too how the three coaches who I ended up highlighting tonight are all male coaches. So I do want to say too that yes, typically when we think of home life, there's a lot of gendered assumptions being made that this is really hard for women. This is actually a place that's also hard for men. And I do know men who have walked away from sport coaching positions because they have young children at home and they haven't been able to be a part of their lives. So I do want to just highlight that. That said, there is really clear evidence in the literature and within my own research that highlights and documents this piece about the gender division of labor and some of the demands of sport coaching work that are specific to women. So with regards to that, it's just very obvious in the data that there are different forms and there are different quantities of these different forms of coaching labor that are demanded of women. And so those would include things like emotional labor or socially reproductive labor. I know that's a really big researchy term, and it comes from an area of research outside of sport coaching. What that has to do with is essentially the rearing, if you will, the human development aspects of sport coaching. So many of us would say that we're not just coaching sport, we're also wanting to help these athletes grow into full human beings. We want to help them develop skills that they can take outside of sport. And so those forms of labor, not only were they mentioned by the women, the male coaches who had female assistants said that they rely on their female assistants to do a lot of that work. The other really important thing to do with women in sport coaching that I want to take a moment here to highlight, and this is back to that piece about intersecting identities, is that because the demands of sport coaching are so high, there's only a few women who can really exist in this space. And for me, that's part of the reason why we're seeing such low numbers. In case people aren't aware, the number of women in sport coaching in university sport has been going down since the 1990s. So there's a declining trend, despite what I think people right now are really enamored with this women in sport movement and the professional women's sport movement, which, don't get me wrong, I am absolutely pumped for. If we look at sport leadership, we're actually seeing a regression there, and that's concerning. And at the Olympic sport level, while Canadian sport coaches were around 16% at the last Olympic Games, overall, we're still below 10% representation in the head coaching role. So these are some really important implications when we're looking at the type of work. The question that comes to my mind is, who are the people that can rise to meet the expectations of this kind of work? So that's something important and worth considering. The important parts that I want to wrap up, and this will be it for me really talking, are I cannot stress enough how the sports system in Canada right now is really reliant on sport coaches who are willing to work nonstop, or to use the title, to overwork themselves. Connected to this is the piece that sport coaches really hold themselves accountable. They really internalize those near constant efforts to be on the sport coaching job clock. And this is so obvious to me when participants shared sentiments like, well, that's just the way it is, or I just have to manage my time better. So when I asked them what kinds of support would help them, they really said, oh no, it really comes down to me. It really comes down to my time management. So this in turn really treats overwork as a personal problem rather than a structural problem. And treating something as an individual problem really raises concerns with regards to sport coaching health and well-being. I am sure that everybody on this call has either experienced or knows a coach who has experienced exhaustion, burnout, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health impacts, just to name a few. And while there are certainly things that individually we need to do and that we can do, we also really need to urge for this change to be happening at a systemic and structural and/or institutional level as well. So I want to take a moment just to pause here and check in. I'm aware that that was a lot. And more often than not, at this point in the presentation, there are people sitting there, some of you are tracking along with this. Some of this is entirely new. And I'm sure there are some people that are like, whew, this is pretty heavy and negative. I just want to take a moment here to highlight that I'm a sport coach. I was a former athlete. I am a lover of sport. And that for me, if we're going to make sport the space that I think many of us want it to be, we really do need to look beneath the surface at some of these larger issues. So the last thing I want is anybody here thinking that I'm an anti-sport scholar. I'm not. I'm really committed to the change, hence all this research that I'm doing. And I'm actively trying to do my best to help change the system, to do the part that I can in documenting this research. It's so important, particularly in this day and age of organizations being so adamant about having evidence and making evidence-based decisions, which I'm sure everyone here has heard, that we actually document and get the evidence. So that's the piece that I think is really important. Okay, so hopefully, maybe some of you are feeling fired up and ready to engage. This is a little clip from one of my favorite movies. You can have a great plan, but sometimes only part of the plan gets thought out, and then it's like, okay, what do we do? So some of you might be sitting here being like, okay, Alix, thanks for pointing out all the problems and all the big things. What am I supposed to do with that? I empathize. And so we are now going to move into the time where I really want people to engage. So the first task tonight is I'd like to put you in breakout rooms and I'd like you to work on doing this. Literally just coming up with a list of as many coaching activities or responsibilities that you can think of. If you can, organize your list kind of like this little table here. That'll be helpful because we're going to add in some components to this exercise as we go. So one final thing is please make sure that everyone does have their own list. I'm sure that this will be the case because we're online tonight and not in person. But please do just make sure that you all have your own list. What questions do you have for me before we put you in your breakout rooms? It's clear? Cool.
Sorry,
All right.
Alex, I have a quick question.
Yeah,
Are we just looking at like our general, like I'm a snowboard coach, so just generally what our snowboard coach is, or me and my role as the coach that I am?
great question. You can be as broad or specific as you want to be. And I love the fact that we have a snowboard coach here. Thank you for being here. That is so different than my sport. And that's important because when you get into these rooms, I think you're going to realize that there are some things in common and then there are some things that aren't in common. But as much as you can, just try to be as general and broad as open. And you can also add in, it's actually another step, is to make it specific to you too. Great question, Cassandra. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so if that's all the questions, then I'm going to turn it over to Allison, who's going to quickly put you into your breakout rooms. We're going to do this for about 4-ish minutes or so, 5-ish minutes, and we'll let you know. We'll broadcast you a little message when we're bringing you back.
And I'll just add, in case you get put in a room with maybe some people who aren't able to participate, just send me a note and we can move someone in so you have a buddy. We don't want anyone to be out on their own. Okay, here we go. There we go.
All right. Yeah, I can see everyone's back now, and I acknowledge that that's hard to do. We actually even gave you a little bit longer. Hard to do in that amount of time. That said, I want us now to share out loud, share what some of the responsibilities you came up with were, or maybe put some in the chat if that's your preference. And if you missed some of the responsibilities you're hearing, just go ahead and add them to your list. I've also provided a couple of examples here, just in case.
I can share the ones that my group came up with, Alex.
Right.
Just we've got a big list going, so anyways, it's just easier to say it than to type it.
Yeah.
So we started with safe sport, practice planning, athlete feedback slash one-on-ones, video review, team staff selection, actually running the practices, yearly planning, PD for yourself and for your staff, game management, supplementary program planning, like if you do like day camps or whatever to pay for part of your job.
Right.
And then like a bunch of different admin kind of tasks like club emails, book facilities, invoices, purchase items, ratify receipts. We had a really big list.
Damn. Yeah, that's great. Great work, that group. Anybody else want to share? Thank you so much for volunteering to go first. I appreciate it. Or does anybody want to add to the chat? Ooh, I see it. Yeah. Social media, mentoring. Like, there is a really great piece coming out. I can't say because I was a reviewer on this piece that talks about the additional free labor of mentoring, which is a sticky one, right? Because it's awesome. We want to do it. We want to help out. We want to contribute, but it's another free piece of labor that is sort of, expected. So, yeah. Oh, wait, pivoting. Yeah, great. Yeah, adapting, pivoting for sure. This is one of my favorite exercises, full disclosure, to do with people. Okay. Yeah. Onus to grow the sport. Yeah, you know what? Thanks so much for mentioning that, Kenzie, because in my research as well, a number of people mentioned that there was an explicit statement, and I saw this in their coaching documents that I analyzed, saying that they must contribute to the growth of the sport outside of the country or outside of the institution. And like, damn, like that's big. That could be all kinds of things. And then to add in the layer of being a relatively new sport to that, I can only imagine like the list of things that one could do is probably endless. So thanks for adding that piece in. This is, as I was saying, one of my favorite activities to do with coaches, because the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And another activity I really like to do with coaches is ask them to write me a job description for themselves. There's always some interesting replies to that one. And someone was like, I don't think I could document that in one page. So I want to bring up Cassandra's point that she brought up earlier, and I'm grateful for that, Cassandra, that if there are things that aren't specific to your context that your group came up with, just go ahead and add those now. And while you add those, so there might be something very specific, for example, to snowboarding that you might not get in volleyball or rugby or whatever sport you're coming here with. But I want us to just talk a little bit about the debrief here. Like, what came up for you, while you were doing that activity, and how did, or maybe how did participating in that activity make you feel about coaching? Again, out loud or in the chat, whatever suits.
I'll be vulnerable and say it's kind of overwhelming when you really put it down on paper and reflect on all of the things that you do or that someone on your staff does.
Thanks for sharing, Allison. One of the things that people really, when we debrief this, they go, I can't believe how much I'm doing. I didn't really realize until I wrote it down how much I was doing. And at that point, my favorite thing is just to remind people there's this fantastic slide, and I should have included it tonight, this quote that talks about how coaching pre-2000s, the list of coaching responsibilities was 6 items. It was broken down to 6 items. And in today's day and age, it's easily multiplied by 10. So when you get coaches to do this activity, people are coming up with lists of 60, of 70, so forth and so on. Yeah, thanks for adding this in the chat, Cassandra. Exactly. So again, that notion of that qualified labor, it's always got to be tethered to something else. You're never just on the slope coaching, because if you were, right, that would be a really different context than constantly calling, building relationships, communicating with people, so forth and so on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that it's a really important piece, Kenzie, and I'm glad that that was the experience you had, is that when you do this activity with other coaches, it's cool when you can do it with your own staff. Allison and I were talking about what that looks like. When you can do it with coaches from other sports and other areas of life, it's a really neat opportunity to come together and kind of create some collective understanding and solidarity and knowing you're not alone. Okay, so this next part of the activity, although you're going to be like, what does this have to do with delegation? We're getting there. This is step 1 of the delegation piece. I want you to just take a moment here, and by moment, I'll give you a couple of minutes on your own individually right now. Do this as quickly as you can. Come up with a ranking next to each of these responsibilities from 1 to 5, so 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, and rank the effort. So what's the effort required from you as a coach, depending on the responsibility, and also the importance. So how important are the responsibilities on a scale from 1 to 5? So just take a couple of minutes right now on your own with your list to write the numbers 1 to 5 next to the coaching responsibility for both effort and importance. Give you about 45 more seconds to finish up. Should have thought of some music, Allison, for this part. My bad. Okay, awesome. So hopefully you've got a ranking. If you don't, that's okay for everyone. We're going to move to the next step of this, and we're going to put you back into your breakout rooms for this step. And this step is going to require you to put a O, a D, or an E next to the responsibility. So as you can see here, the O stands for what is a coaching responsibility you absolutely have to own. There's no questions. I have to do it. I want you to put a D next to one that you think like, it's important. Do I need to do it? Is there somebody else who can do it? So the delegate piece, and then E is kind of eliminate or put elsewhere. So are there things on that list that you can eliminate altogether, or that, they're a nice to, but maybe a not right now, that you can kind of create a list and sort of bracket that there for now? So O, D, and E. And I want you to do this in your groups again, so that you can kind of talk through what you're thinking while you do this. And again, to Kenzie's point, so you can kind of share in the process of of what you're thinking while you're doing this. We are absolutely going to debrief as a group when we come back, but I hope that makes sense. Does anybody have questions? If not, then Allison, please work your magic and return everyone to their breakout room. Okay, I see that we're all back now. So thanks so much for taking some time to do that. Again, I want to talk to you about how that activity went. You don't need to answer all three of these questions. If one of these questions sticks out to you that someone wants to jump in and share with us, again, out loud or in the chat, we'd love to hear what the experience of going through that was like for you.
I'll jump in and just share that this is actually something I'm doing right now. My list is very, very long, and I'm trying to, ironically, I'm adding more to my list temporarily so that I can eventually have less. And I'll just explain that by, right now I'm just trying to grow the number of volunteers, grow the number of people on our boards and committees, and recruit. We have a large club, so I'm just trying to recruit more people from the club to participate so that I can delegate and eventually reduce my list. So even though I'm temporarily adding more roles to my list right now, it's just in the interim. Maybe I'm kidding myself, but I'm trying really, really hard to stay focused on that as the goal. I will do this work now so that I do less in a few months and in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Sherry. I wonder, if you have someone who's going to check in on you in a couple of months to see how that's going, just to make sure that you have now done less. But certainly, again, that sometime is the way it goes, right? We have to do more so we can eventually do less. So that's a really important nuance, and I'm so glad you brought that up. Great to see in here. Yeah, really interesting. I've had this one before too. Sometimes your fives are not O's, right? So sometimes it switches things up a little bit. Yeah, this is a great question, Stacy. Like, who do I delegate to? I did want to say, it popped into my head and I heard myself go, talk less, Alex, which is something that I often say. But I wanted to acknowledge that not everybody is in a position where they have an assistant coach or a co-coach or someone that they can delegate to. So that's a very real question. Maybe you do have someone to delegate to, but you're not sure if the role or the task is something that person could manage, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's another great question, external or internal importance. For sure, like and I think when you say external or internal, are you talking about the task itself? Like, who is this task important to? Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that that parents really, they want to see their child maybe represented on a post, and they want to see everyone have a post at some point, you know, that's a lot more work for you. And so if you have to create all of those posts, that's going to be, again, a lot of work. And it's so funny because in my mind, I go, if the parents are the ones who care about the social media, great, task a parent with doing the social media. I say that like it's easy. I'm sure that there are other things to consider, but that's sort of what comes to my mind. You know, I often get the pushback on who do I delegate this to, and not from the standpoint of I don't have anyone to. It's I don't trust anybody else to do this. I always appreciate when people are honest and share that and really vulnerable and share that, like, not all the people around me I necessarily trust, and or some of us are really, we like to be in control. I mean, people in leadership, people in head coaching positions like to be in control. There's also the thought of me explaining this to somebody else is going to take more time. And I want to connect that back to what Sherry said. If you can take more time now to educate and teach somebody how to do something, might add to your workload now, but it could in a couple of months make things easier. So that could be something too that's helpful. Yeah, well, totally fair. Again, sometimes delegation is a right time, right place, Kenzie. And so you might not be in the specific space that you can actually do that. And so that's completely fair. And if you don't even know what the task is yourself, and then you want to involve somebody else in that, like that gets a whole lot stickier and a whole lot, you know, more nuanced, which I love nuance. I love gray area personally as a qualitative person. That's like my jam. So it's my jam, and it's also frustrating and hard to navigate. So I empathize, and it's a really good point. Yeah, cool. Okay, so yeah, so thank you everyone who shared out loud and in the chat. I really appreciate it. And again, you know, I think some of the times too, like people think that we need to have answers and we need to know everything right now. The other important piece is we're discovering this together. And so, you know, even if parts of this activity tonight weren't like the most helpful for you, maybe it is something that you could return back to at some point, or that you could adapt or change. Like I'm sure there are people on this call that have better ideas of how this activity could be better. And that's cool too. That's how we all get better, is we contribute our piece. So thank you. So the last little thing, and again, I'm sharing my slides with Allison, who can send this to you. So I'm going to go through this last little piece quite quick, is to think a little bit about boundaries. So I started today talking about how coaching is boundaryless. I'm pushing back now on that internal dialogue of I have to do everything all the time, all at once, everything everywhere all at once, right? I need to be that person. One of the things that's helped me tremendously, and there's a lot of research on, is this piece about holding boundaries. So, you know, what boundaries can you put around those things that you absolutely must do? How can you make them fit into your day-to-day life that doesn't put you out? And I think this is a really important one to consider. And if you don't like those questions, there's 4 more on the slide here for you to consider when you're thinking about boundary setting. So a couple of things just to wrap up here. I know we're tight on time, and I do want to leave time in case people have questions. Things to consider past today. So these are reflection points. I just think that one of the most important pieces of sport coaching is taking time to reflect. Again, another thing you have to do at the end of the day when you're exhausted and tired and just want to go to bed. I take the GO bus into Toronto, so it's about an hour commute for me, sometimes just over a commute. And I really use that commute time to reflect and decompress on my day. And I do it in a number of ways. Sometimes it's questions like the ones you see here, and sometimes it's just me writing out what I noticed and what came up that day. But I think these are some really important things that folks could consider and think about. So to wrap up, I just want to say again that we're responsible for a lot. And so one of the things that we can do, and this is one of the personal things that we can do, is we can learn how to delegate. And maybe we're not at the stage of delegating yet. And possibly that puts you in a very unique and awesome position to create the list and also think of the ways in which they can be delegated at the same time. That just occurred to me right now, Kenzie. So maybe that's something we can talk about. And then there are other things that I think I want to suggest here, and that's the system of support things. And people ask me all the time, like, how do I do that? By doing the research I do, by having the opportunity to be hired by organizations to create policy. It's really nice to see Rugby Nova Scotia on here tonight. And to get the opportunity to work in my work that way. I'm one of those people that is up for and wants to challenge the system. And someone like me with the credentials I have more opportunity to do that. So I'm committed to doing that work. And of course, we got to shout out our women's rugby team who are going into a big one this week. Friday's match is at 2 p.m. against New Zealand, just in case anyone didn't know. Check it out. So yeah, so this is my wrap up slide. What else? Do you have any questions? And maybe as we wrap up here too, I'll just invite everyone to kind of return to that activity we did earlier where you put a word about how you were showing up. If you could just put a word in about, how you're leaving, that would be awesome. So thanks everyone. Thanks, Tamara. Appreciate it. And yes, there is my email, and love to see these words coming in. That's so awesome. That's such a gift to me. So thank you. There's my email in the chat. Please do reach out. I love talking with coaches. I love talking with coaches in other sports. I love learning what's going on for people that's different than mine. It's just one of my favorite things to do. So, if anything here was interesting to you or you want to chat more, I am ready